Hello and welcome to Workers' Comp Unwrapped, the podcast that simplifies workers' compensation for physicians. I'm your host, Max, here to give you clear, actionable insights to navigate the medical legal side of workers' comp. So, let's get started. Welcome to episode 12 of Workers' Comp Unwrapped. With me today is
Aisha,
who has 15 years of experience in the workers' comp industry. Today we are talking about mastering the Declaration of Readiness to proceed. Prerequisites, challenges, and insights. You can call it the VIEW.
DOR.
For short.
It's great to be here. You know, the DOR process can be a bit tricky for medical providers, especially when it comes to maximizing revenue.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit.
Okay.
What exactly is DOR and why is it so crucial for medical providers in California's workers' comp system?
Well, think of the DOR as your signal to the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board.
The WCAB?
Yes, the WCAB, that you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's and you're ready for a hearing to settle a disputed case. It basically says, all right, let's get this show on the road. But before you even think about filing that DOR, there are some crucial prerequisites.
Prerequisites, huh? Sounds serious. What kind of things are we talking about here?
Let's start with the basics. You absolutely need a WCAB case number, which means an application for adjudication of claim has already been filed. No case number, no DOR. It's like trying to order a pizza without giving them your address.
Makes sense. So what comes next?
The next big thing is what we call completed discovery. Think of it like gathering all the puzzle pieces before you start putting the puzzle together. We're talking about all those medical evaluations, reports, treatment notes, and any other documentation relevant to the case. Everything needs to be finished, organized, and shared with all the parties involved.
So everyone's on the same page with all the facts before heading into a hearing. What happens if you miss a piece of the puzzle?
That's where things can get messy and potentially costly. You see, the WCAB is very strict about these prerequisites. If your documentation isn't complete or if you haven't properly notified everyone, the other side can object and your DOR might get tossed out.
Ouch. That sounds like a major setback, especially for a busy medical practice. So what's the best way for providers to avoid this kind of headache?
The key is to be organized and proactive. Many providers struggle with the documentation aspect. They're focused on patient care, and paperwork can easily fall through the cracks.
So what are some practical tips for staying on top of things? I mean, we all know documentation is important, but how do you actually make it happen in the real world?
I'm glad you asked that. First off, have a system in place, whether it's a good old-fashioned checklist or a fancy electronic system. Make sure you have a way to track deadlines, manage communication, and organize all those reports and evaluations.
Systems and checklists sound simple enough. What else should providers be thinking about?
Don't underestimate the power of good communication. Keep the lines open with the other parties involved, especially the insurer. Keep them in the loop on your progress with the case and any challenges you're facing. Remember, you're not trying to pull a fast one. You're aiming for transparency and efficiency, which ultimately benefits everyone, including your patients.
So it's almost like treating the DOR process as a collaboration, even though there's a dispute at the heart of it.
Exactly. Transparency and communication can go a long way in preventing those dreaded objections down the line.
This is making a lot of sense. So we've covered the case number and completed discovery. What other hurdles do providers need to clear before filing that DOR?
The next biggie is demonstrating a good faith effort to resolve the dispute outside of a formal hearing. This is where a lot of providers trip up, and unfortunately, it can impact their bottom line.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Good faith effort sounds a bit vague. What does that actually look like in practice, and how do you prove it?
This is where meticulous documentation becomes your best friend. It's not enough to just say, oh, I tried to work things out. You need to provide tangible evidence.
Evidence, like what? Give us some concrete examples.
Think dates, times, names, specific points of discussion, anything that demonstrates you genuinely attempted to reach a resolution. For example, if you've been going back and forth with the insurer about a billing dispute, keep detailed records of every phone call, email, and letter. Note the date, who you spoke with, and what was discussed.
So if an objection comes up, you have a clear paper trail to back up your claim. It's all about being prepared.
Precisely. Remember, the WCAB wants to see that you've exhausted all reasonable options before resorting to a hearing. A well-documented good faith effort shows that you're committed to resolving the issue efficiently and fairly. And let's be honest, no one wants to spend their days in court, right?
Absolutely. Plus, avoiding unnecessary hearings can help providers save time and resources, which ultimately translates to a healthier bottom line. So to recap, before filing that DOR, we need to ensure we have the WCAB case number, all our documentation is complete and organized, and we've documented our efforts to settle the dispute. Any other potential pitfalls medical providers should be aware of?
There are a few more nuances to the DOR process, especially regarding recent changes and potential objections, but I think those are best saved for our next segment.
All right, we'll take a quick break and be back to delve deeper into those challenges and how to overcome them. Stick around, folks. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to mastering the DOR.
Welcome back.
Where were we?
Yes, those pesky potential pitfalls in the DOR process. Let's face it, even with the best intentions and meticulous documentation, you might still encounter objections from the other side.
Objections. So even if you think you've done everything right, there's still a chance things could get held up. What are some of the most common objections providers face?
One of the most frequent objections we see is related to the good faith effort to resolve the dispute. The insurer might argue that your attempts were insufficient or not conducted properly.
So it's not just about documenting the efforts, it's about the quality and substance of those efforts. What separates a weak attempt from a solid one in the eyes of the WCAB?
That's exactly right. For example, imagine a scenario where a provider sends a single email to the insurer about a billing dispute and then immediately files a DOR. The WCAB might view that as a superficial effort, lacking genuine attempts to find common ground.
Okay, so one and done doesn't cut it. What would constitute a more robust good faith effort in that same scenario?
A stronger approach would involve multiple points of contact, detailed explanations of the disputed charges, and a willingness to consider alternative solutions like a compromise on the billing amount. Remember, the WCAB is looking for evidence of sincere negotiation and a commitment to resolving the dispute fairly.
This all makes sense, but it also sounds like a lot for busy medical providers to juggle. Are there any proactive strategies they can use to address potential objections before they even arise?
Absolutely. Proactive communication is key. Don't wait until the last minute to start engaging with the insurer. Reach out early in the process, keep them informed about the progress of the case, and be transparent about any challenges you're facing.
So it's almost like building a collaborative relationship, even though there's a dispute at the heart of it. It's about keeping those lines of communication open.
Precisely. If the insurer feels like you're genuinely trying to work with them, they're less likely to throw up roadblocks when you file the DOR.
This makes a lot of sense. Transparency and communication can go a long way in preventing those dreaded delays and disputes. What are some other proactive steps providers can take?
Documentation. We can't emphasize this enough. Keep detailed records of all communication with the insurer, attempts to settle, and especially your efforts to complete discovery. If an objection does come up, you'll be ready to back up your claims with solid evidence.
It's like having a paper trail of preparedness. I love it. But let's be honest, the workers' comp system can be a bit of a moving target. Are there any recent changes or updates that providers need to be aware of?
You're right, the landscape is always shifting. There have been some proposed amendments to Section 104.14 that aim to make the DOR requirements even stricter.
Stricter. Tell me more.
Essentially, these amendments emphasize the need for even more detailed and specific statements in your DOR regarding your efforts to resolve the issue and your readiness for trial. They really want to see that you've gone above and beyond to avoid a formal hearing.
So the takeaway here is, be meticulous, dot your I's and cross your T's. Or you could face the consequences. No cutting corners.
Exactly. And speaking of consequences, let's dive into some real-world case studies to really drive home the point.
Case studies. Oh, I love a good legal thriller.
Well, this one might not be Hollywood material, but it certainly highlights what can happen when the DOR process goes wrong. Our sources mentioned a case involving a medical provider who filed a DOR, but they hadn't adequately documented their attempts to resolve a billing dispute with the insurer.
Ooh, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. What happened?
It didn't go well. The insurer objected, arguing that the provider hadn't made a good faith effort to settle. Because the provider's documentation was weak, the WCAB sided with the insurer.
So what was the fallout? Did the provider have to go back to the drawing board and start the process all over again?
Worse. Not only was the DOR dismissed, but the case was delayed for months, and the provider was ordered to pay a portion of the insurer's legal costs.
Ouch. That's a painful lesson. It really highlights how important clear, detailed documentation is in this process.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just say you've tried to resolve things. You need to prove it. Dates, times, names, specific points of discussion, write it all down.
It's all about painting a clear picture for the WCAB, showing them that you've exhausted all other avenues before heading to a hearing. So for all our listeners out there, especially those medical providers dealing with workers' comp claims, what's the key takeaway here?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is this. Don't underestimate the power of the DOR. It can be a valuable tool, but only when used correctly.
What does used correctly mean in this context?
Invest the time up front to get everything in order. Make sure your documentation is rock solid and be proactive in your communication with the insurer. It might seem like a hassle, but trust me, it's far less hassle than dealing with the consequences of a poorly filed DOR. It's like the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, or in this case, a pound of legal fees.
Exactly. And remember, the workers' compensation landscape is always evolving. New laws, new regulations, new interpretations. It's a lot to keep up with.
That's why it's crucial to stay informed. Subscribe to industry newsletters, attend workshops, and connect with other professionals in the field. Sharing knowledge and best practices is essential for staying ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. It's all about continuous learning. Never stop expanding your knowledge and refining your approach. After all, the more you know about the DOR process and the surrounding regulations, the better equipped you'll be to navigate it successfully and maximize your revenue.
That's precisely the goal. We want to empower providers with the knowledge and confidence to navigate the complexities of the workers' comp system and achieve the best possible outcomes for themselves and their patients.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about the prerequisites for filing a DOR, common challenges, recent changes, and we've even explored some real-world case studies to illustrate the importance of thorough preparation and meticulous documentation. But before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder.
Oh, I love a good thought-provoking question. What do you have for us?
We've talked about how important it is to be prepared when filing a DOR. But I'm curious, what are some specific strategies providers can use to proactively address potential objections before they even arise?
That's a great question. In fact, it's so important that we're going to dedicate our entire next segment to exploring those strategies.
Stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back with more insights and expert advice on all things workers' comp. We're back and ready to tackle that question I posed.
Okay.
How can providers get ahead of potential DOR objections?
Well, proactive communication is key. Don't wait until the last minute to start talking to the other side. Reach out early. Keep them in the loop about your progress on the case. And be transparent about any challenges you're facing.
So almost treat it like a collaborative process, even though there's a dispute.
Exactly. The goal is to avoid surprises. If the insurer knows what to expect, they're less likely to throw up roadblocks when you file the DOR.
Makes sense. What else can providers do to smooth the way?
Be organized and meticulous with your documentation.
Why?
We've talked about this before, but it's worth repeating. Keep detailed records of all communication, attempts to settle, and especially your efforts to complete discovery.
So if an objection does come up, you're ready to back up your claims with solid evidence.
Precisely. A well-organized file demonstrates your commitment to the process and makes it harder for the other party to question your readiness.
This is where good systems and processes come in, right? Especially for busy medical practices.
Absolutely. Having a clear system for tracking deadlines, managing communication, and organizing documentation can save you a lot of headaches down the road.
I think that's a great point to emphasize. Sometimes these procedural details can feel overwhelming, but investing in good systems can make a huge difference.
It's all about working smarter, not harder. And remember, if you're ever unsure about anything related to the DOR, don't hesitate to seek guidance from qualified professionals.
Excellent advice. There are experts out there who can help you navigate the complexities of workers' comp and ensure you're on the right track.
And speaking of experts,
Yes.
I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about mastering the DOR.
We've definitely done a deep dive today. We've talked about the prerequisites, common challenges, recent changes, and even some proactive strategies for success.
And hopefully we've equipped our listeners with the knowledge and confidence to tackle their next DOR with ease.
Absolutely. Remember, folks, the DOR might seem like a small step, but it's a powerful tool when used correctly. Take the time to understand the process, get your ducks in a row, and you'll be well on your way to a smoother, more efficient workers' comp experience.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's been a pleasure joining you today.
Thanks for all your insights, Aisha, and to all our listeners. Thanks for tuning in to Workers' Comp Unwrapped. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the world of workers' compensation. Until then, stay informed, stay prepared, and stay ahead of the game. Thank you for listening to Workers' Comp Unwrapped. If you found value in today's episode, share it with your fellow medical providers and healthcare specialists. For more information, contact us at lena.klein@medicallienmgt.com or visit our website, medicallienmgt.com.